welcome to this first event of the History and Community Conference, which is hosted by the Stanford Historical Society and the Stanford University Archives, and thanks to funding from the County of Santa Clara's Historic Grant Program. I'm excited to have three experts in Stanford libraries who I work with, who work extensively on archiving and analyzing digital content. Each will give you a taste of the tools and approaches for archiving and analyzing digital content. Each panelist presentation will be about a half an hour, followed by time for questions. Please submit your questions for each panelist in the Q&A module, and we will be open for general questions to all the panelists at the end of the presentation. And so now to why you're all here. Our first panelist is Sally Debauche. Sally is a digital archivist in the Department of Special Collections at Stanford University Libraries. She is responsible for creating policy and workflows related to born digital archiving and processing born digital collections, with a particular focus on email and the ePad email processing software. She will provide participants with knowledge of contemporary developments in the area of email archiving, introduce and build familiarity with the ePad software, and provide participants with the experience and tools to implement of ePad to appraise, process, and support discovery, and provide access for email archives. So take it away, Sally.
Great. So as Ron said, thanks for that introduction. I'm Sally Debauche, and I'm a digital archivist at Stanford Libraries. Thank you so much for the invitation to join you here today, and thanks to everyone who organized this event. This is really fantastic. I'm going to be giving you an overview of the ePad email curating and access software, as well as talking about demonstrating some of its features that might be of interest to you if you have email accounts that you are looking to manage and preserve for future use. So before I get into that, I just want to give you a little bit of background and context to the issue of email collecting and preservation more broadly. So email is a hugely important form of historical documentation. It's truly the modern form of correspondence. It's also so ubiquitous, and even though we have many other ways to communicate now, email still tends to be the primary means of communication for business, and is also heavily used by many people in their personal communication as well. And so for these reasons, email is such a ripe source of information for research. It's such a comprehensive form of documentation of our work, creative processes, relationships with friends, family, business colleagues, and it does so in a very complex way, right? Including lots of artifacts like photos, documents, and links within the email account. Yet it is still pretty rare to find email archives accessible to researchers in libraries and archives, as well as government and corporate settings. So what is the disconnect? And I think really it comes down to the fact that collecting, processing, preserving, and providing access to email presents some major challenges for email account holders, collecting institutions like archives, and researchers who would seek to use email in their work. First, because we all use email constantly for various functions, both professional and personal. There tends to be a lot of personal or sensitive information included in email collections. And this might be information that account holders may prefer not to share with collecting institutions, and information that our institutions really can't make available to researchers, both for legal and ethical reasons. So in addition to those ethical legal concerns, email presents a number of technical challenges as well. In a report released in 2018, the Task Force on Technical Approaches for Email Archives, the authors say, quote, "Email is not one thing, but a complicated interaction of technical subsystems for composition, transport, viewing, and storage," end quote. And historically, there's never been one single email file format that's been universally adopted. So you have multiple file formats to contend with, some of which are no longer in use today. And then lastly, email collections can be really large, and we're talking like millions or tens of millions of messages. So the scale that collections can grow to only compounds those first two issues that I described. So with a little understanding of the significance of email, as well as some of the challenges that are preventing us from collecting or making it more accessible, we'll turn to ePad and how it fits into this landscape. So even though collecting, curating, preserving email sounds a little bit daunting from what I just laid out, it's absolutely possible and can be very rewarding. So ePad was developed to address many of these challenges, for helping email account holders and collecting institutions to collect, process, and provide access to email. First, ePad provides tools to help email account holders and archivists screen email collections for sensitive, restricted, or legally protected information. Sensitive information can often be a major barrier to providing greater access to email collections. So being able to restrict it and provide an email collection that's free of it is really critical for our institutions to actually allow researchers to use email collections. And then ePad provides tools to discover and analyze the intellectual content of email collections. So I mentioned one of the big challenges of working with email can be the scale. Whether you're an archivist processing a collection or a researcher trying to use a collection in your work, you cannot possibly review every single message in an email collection. It doesn't matter if you're dealing with 10,000 messages or millions. You need efficient ways to find specific information within a collection. And ePad provides a range of methods to browse collections as well as perform really targeted searches so that we can better understand the intellectual content of a collection. And then finally, ePad enables research and scholarship using email collections of historic value in a couple of key ways. ePad has 2 modules that are geared towards researchers. We'll talk about these a little more detail in a minute. But first, ePad has the discovery module, which allows collecting institutions to publish a redacted set of metadata about their email collections online. And second, the delivery module allows institutions to provide a full text version of their email collections, minus any restricted messages, of course, to researchers in a physical location like an archives reading room. Okay, a little more background on the ePad software itself. It's a Java-based application. It's supported by these operating systems and web browsers. And ePad is free open source software. You can download it from GitHub. I will provide the link to that at the end of the presentation. It incorporates concepts from computer science like machine learning, automated metadata extraction, and natural language processing to support the review, discovery, and access to email collections. And then before I go any further, I just have to pause to give a huge shout out to our project team, our funders, both past and present, and our amazing user community. So currently our project team is made up of archivists, library administrators, and computer programmers from Stanford, Harvard University, and the University of Manchester. We're currently working on a joint project to add better functionality to support preservation workflows and actions for email archives. And that's ongoing through the end of this year. Also have to give my appreciation to the granting organizations that have supplied the funding for all of the process or development work on this software, including the National Historical Public Archives and Records Commission, the Institute on Museum and Library Services, Stanford Libraries, and the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. And then finally, we have an amazing community of users. I'm not sure if this list even captures all of them. We are an open source project, so we welcome all feedback from our users, and their input is really critical to our future development. Okay. So before we look at the ePad software itself, I just want to give you a really high level overview of how it's organized. So ePad is structured into 4 modules. Each module is corresponding to a phase of the email processing workflow, and each has specific functionality geared towards the intended user of that stage of the workflow. So the first module is the appraisal module. This is geared towards email account holders, curators, or archivists, and it supports the ingest of email accounts into ePad and contains functionality designed to help those users to review an email collection and potentially identify and restrict sensitive information, as well as to classify or label messages. The second module is the processing module, and this is geared towards archivists or records managers and has the same functionality as the appraisal module, with the addition of some tools to allow those users to disambiguate and confirm authorities within a collection. And then finally, there are two modules geared towards researchers. So the discovery module is an optional module that can be hosted on a web server and supports the public access to a redacted set of metadata for a collection. So this view would include information like named entities found in an email collection, message headers and message dates, and the name part of email addresses. And then finally, the delivery module is the module that is typically installed on a reading room workstation at a collecting institution, and it provides users with a full text version of a processed email collection that's omitting any messages that have been restricted, of course. So, okay, with that, all of that background, I'd like to actually give you a look at what ePad looks like and how it works, some of the features that you might use in working with your own email collections. So we're looking at ePad right now. This is the software, and we're looking at a test collection from Debauche. This example is because if you remember back in 2016, Jeb Bush was running for president, and he released his email from the time when he was governor of Florida. It was kind of an effort to show how transparent he was as a politician. Unfortunately, his team did not do proper due diligence. That collection contained a huge amount of personal information, people who were emailing Jeb Bush with all kinds of situations about themselves, their friends, family, that really shouldn't have been made public. So his team revoked that collection from their site, but not before many people, including Peter Chan, actually scooped it up off the internet. We then scrubbed it for that personal information and used it as a test collection. So anyway, preamble aside, this is the ePad processing module. So this is the module that an archivist would be using in order to process the collection and make it usable for researchers. And I'm showing you this particular module because it has the most functionality. So I want you to be able to see the widest possible range of things that you could do with your collections. So first thing that you'll probably notice right off the bat is that this looks very different from any other software you've probably used to interact with email before. You know, normally we're used to seeing like the list of email messages on the left with maybe a preview and then the body of the message on the right and some attachments, right? And this is a very different view, but that's intentional because, you know, I don't know about you, but I've tried to find things in my own email that I know for a fact are in there. And the number of times I've struggled to find things that I know are there, it's crazy. So ePad is designed to help you both browse an email collection in a very free and open way, and also search it in a very specific and targeted way, both depending on what you're trying to do with the collection and your level of familiarity with the collection. So there are a lot of features for both browsing and searching, which I'll show you. There's really no right or wrong order to approach any of this. So just for demonstration purposes, I'll kind of go top to bottom, left to right, but just know that there's really no right or wrong way to review an email collection. So you can see here on this dashboard that we have these 9 panes across the screen, and they kind of organize this email or provide a window into this email collection in a number of different ways. So I'll show you each one of these and some of the features that you'll be able to use to review your email collections. Okay, correspondence. This is kind of what you might imagine. It's organizing the collection based on the correspondence found within the collection. So you can see that ePad has pulled out the names of correspondence found in this collection, and they're ordered from top to bottom, most associated messages to least, although you can change that sorting order. If we click on one of these, we'll be able to see all of the messages associated with this correspondent, and you can see that that name has been highlighted so that you can easily see what the correspondent that you clicked on was. And this is probably looking a little bit more like what you're used to seeing, how you're used to seeing email. We've got the email header up at the top with the date to, from, CC, and BCC, as well as the subjects. And then right below that, we have the main body of the email message. On the left-hand side, we have these facets that can kind of help you drill down even further into this subset of messages. So you can see that in this subset of 40 messages, there are also 7 that are related to this correspondence. So that would help you potentially drill down even further into this collection. I'll give you a little tour of the rest of the buttons on this page. So we have labels right here. We have the ability in ePad to label email messages within the collection. ePad comes with a set of preloaded labels, which most of these are, but you can also create any number of custom labels that you would like to for your collection. These can be used in a couple different ways. So you can use them to help identify information that needs to be restricted. So you can see at the top, you have these restricted labels, including personal address, do not transfer, or transfer to delivery only. So these can help you to, and if these are applied, then the messages that you've applied them to won't go through into those subsequent modules. They'll be filtered out, basically. You can also create any number of general labels about perhaps topics in the collection, projects that an individual worked on, events that they organized, really depends on the collection that you're working on. But these can be used to kind of help curate the intellectual content of the collection, maybe help researchers to identify messages related to certain topics or themes that were important to that person. And you can see if we apply one of these, it will show up here. Okay, we can resort the messages based on these criteria. We can switch to something called attachment view, which is going to show us all of the attachments associated with that subset of messages. I'll go through this in a little more detail later, so I'll just switch back to message view for now. I said that you can apply labels to messages. You can apply them in bulk too, so that if you don't want to, if you know that they apply to, this entire subset of 40 messages, you don't have to individually attach them to each one. You can also download a subset of messages. It's going to download as an mbox file, and I'll talk about those a little bit more later. But this can be useful for sharing messages if you'd like to share them with researchers, perhaps. You'd navigate through these messages with these left to right arrows. And then down here, you have the ability to add a message annotation. This is going to appear kind of like a sticky note, and this is something that you could use to add further notes about a message. So you could use labels to add information about about messages, but if you have something more detailed that you want to add, you could also use an annotation. This is going to show you the unique ID for this particular message. Each message in ePad has a unique ID, and this can be really useful for keeping track of things or finding them later. So if you have found some messages that you'd like to find later and you don't want to have to remember exactly the search terms you use to find them, you could copy the ID and find it very easily later. This will show you the subset of messages associated with the thread of messages. So this is just one message in this thread, but say you had an email thread that's like 10 messages long, that would show you those 10 messages. And then this is going to show you attachments. Let me actually click through and find a message that has an attachment. Okay, so you can see this has a 1 next to it, indicating that there's one attachment associated with this message. If we click it, it'll scroll us down to the bottom and we'll be able to see that attachment. In this case, it looks like it's a Word doc. So if you wanted to review that document, you would click on this and it would download and you could open it in Microsoft Word on your computer. Okay, let me go back to the main dashboard. We'll take a look at entities next. So entities are basically the people, places, and things associated with an email collection. These terms are actually pulled out of the collection text by ePad as it's ingesting your collection. So it's an automated process. Let me show you what one of these looks like as an example. We'll click on university, and you can see that these universities or academic institutions have been pulled out of the collection text by ePad. If we click on one of them, we'll see the subset of messages associated with that term, and it is highlighted to make it easy to see what term you're looking at. This can be a really useful tool to kind of get started with. If you're not too familiar with the content of a collection, you kind of want to get a high level overview of what terms or people or subjects might be in discussion in an email collection, this is a good place to start. Okay, so we'll go back to the main dashboard. We'll take a look at labels next. So I mentioned that you can create custom labels for your email collection. This is where you would go to do that. So you can see the ones that are already here, and you can see the number of messages associated with each one. If you want to add a new label, you would simply click on this, and you could add the label name, a description, and you can choose whether to make it a general label or a restriction label. For restriction labels, you can also additionally choose to make it actionable or not. So you can apply like basically an expiration date to your label. If you know that some information only needs to be restricted for 50 years, you could make that actionable here. Okay, we'll go back to the main dashboard and we'll take a look at image attachments. So on this screen, you can see all of the image attachments associated with this particular collection. And you can see that there are 176 attachments from 2003 to 2003. There's only 1 year represented in this test. And you can see that it's also telling us that there are 71 duplicates out of the 176, which is very helpful because there are often duplicate attachments found in email collections, and it's nice to have them sort of filtered out so that you're not looking at all of them, because while ePad doesn't delete duplicate attachments, it won't show you all of the duplicates either. So it makes it a little bit easier to deal with. And if we click on one of these, we'll be able to see that this attachment has this file name. This is the information associated with the message that it's attached to. So you can see the subject of that message here. You can see the sender of the message and the date that it was sent on. You can download this specific attachment, and you can also pop out to the associated message. Okay, we'll go back to the main dashboard now. And then if we go to the all attachments page, this is showing us all attachments in the collection regardless of the file format. So you can see that there are 288 attachments total with 88 duplicates. And here you'll see we have a lot of those image attachments. There are also other types of files, like we have this Word doc, these Word docs here. ePad is able to render some files within the software, but not all file types. And just due to the extremely wide range of file types that you could encounter in an email collection, it's possible that you're going to have some that ePad doesn't render within the application. So if you have something like a Word doc and you're interested in reading the contents of it, you would simply download it and then open it on your computer. And you can see, similar to what we saw before, we've got the related information. In this case, we can see that this message this attachment is actually associated with 2 messages. So if we were to click on this, ePad would show us both messages that this document has been attached to, which is helpful to give you that context. Okay, I'll go back to the dashboard. Okay, the folder view is going to show you the folders that how messages are associated with the folders that they were contained in as they were created by the donor. So this can be really helpful if you have an email account holder who maybe used a lot of folders in their email account to organize things. You would be able to see those here. For this example, it's not very exciting because there was just one folder, but say somebody had created many folders that they had stored email in, you would be able to see that here, and you could see the number of messages associated with each one. So this can be a really helpful tool, again, for trying to understand how the email creator organized their email. Okay, I'll go back to the main dashboard. And I'll show you lexicon search. This is the screen in ePad that I probably spend the most time on when I'm processing a collection. This is basically a tool that allows you to do like bulk keyword searching of an email collection around different themes that might be of interest to you. So you can see that we have some preloaded here, including sentiment, sensitive. We have quite a few that were actually contributed by users of ePad, including, you can see some of these institutions, Duke, New York Public Library, created lexicons for collections that they were working on. And as a user of EPAD, you can also create any number of new custom lexicons, which are basically groups of terms organized around certain topics or themes. So let me show you an example of what these look like. So this is the sensitive lexicon, and you can see that there are a number of subcategories within this. These might be subjects that you're interested in looking at to make sure that see if there's information that you need to restrict from a potential researcher being able to access. We can edit these too. So I'll click into edit so you can see exactly what terms are contained within each one. You can see under personally identifiable information, these are some of the terms that are contained. You can pretty easily edit these just by clicking in the text field and, editing away. And I'll also show you this test feature, which shows you how many messages are associated with each specific term within that lexicon. So this kind of helps you to determine if you're having one term that's getting a lot of results or one term that's maybe not getting any results. And it can kind of help you fine tune your lexicons to make them even more effective. This is going to be a very efficient way of finding information within your collection. Okay. Reports is probably something that you may or may not use. It basically gives you information about how EPAD imported your collection. So this may be something you would turn to if you're troubleshooting something that might have gone wrong. Okay, so let me show you search, because I think this is another place that you will spend a lot of time if you're reviewing a collection. So EPAD has a number of ways to search within a collection. You can, of course, just do a simple keyword search on this screen. You can do what's called a multi-entity search. So you can paste or type a block of text into this collection, and EPAD will actually pull out the terms that are matching those entities, which I showed you that screen where we had the basically people, places, and things about the collection. And EPAD will show you how similar that block of text is to your collection. So it can kind of help you do some analysis of the topics or themes that are popping up in your collection. You can also do a multi-entity or a multi-term search, kind of similar to creating a lexicon in that you can search multiple terms at the same time, but you can just kind of throw it together on the fly, see what is coming up with the results or not. Kind of a similar idea, you can do a correspondent list search. So if you wanted to search on 5, 10 correspondents all at the same time, you don't have to search each one individually. You can just create a list of correspondents and look for them all at the same time. Okay, and then there is an advanced search page, which has a very robust array of ways to search on a collection. Basically, any way you could think to search on an email collection, you can probably search on. So you can get very granular with how you're choosing to search. For terms, perhaps you only want to search subject lines in an email rather than the bodies. You can make that distinction here. Same idea with correspondence. You can make the distinction of whether they're in the to, from, BCC or CC fields. You can filter out mailing lists, which can be really helpful because sometimes you may have a lot of mailing lists that are, maybe not as interesting to your research, and you can choose to filter them out here. You can search on attachments specifically. You can search on the annotations that you have made in the collection, and then you can search on just a range of things, including specific timeline or specific timeframes, the source of the email, entities, and lexicons. So many, many ways to search. Okay, so I've covered the basic functionality of the EPAD processing module. If there are things that you spotted while I was going through that I wasn't able to explain at this moment, please ask in the Q&A. Happy to go through anything more in detail. But for now, I'm going to go back to my presentation. Okay, so now that we've taken a look at EPAD, you may be wondering, how do I get my email into the software? I'll briefly explain the process, and if you're interested in learning more, I would highly recommend checking out our online user guide for really detailed step-by-step instructions on this process. So the important thing to know is that EPAD accepts the MBOX file format for ingest. This is a very common and widely supported email file format. You may already have some email files in Mbox format. That's great. You can import them into ePad. If not, I'll give you a really brief overview of how you might export them or convert the files that you do have in order to import them. I can't cover every possible scenario, so if you have questions about your specific case, I'd be happy to consult at the end of the session or over email. So once you have your Mbox files, you'll be able to import them into the appraisal module and do some of the review that I just showed you. Okay, so I'm going to give you two very common scenarios. If you are dealing with email in Gmail, it's a fairly simple process to export your email from Gmail thanks to Google's data export tool, Google Takeout. You would just go to takeout.google.com. You can select the data that you want to export. In this case, it would be, you would choose mail. And then you also have the further option to select specific folders from your mail. So you can, you don't necessarily have to export the entire account if you don't want to. Then when you export it, you're going to get that Mbox file sent to your Gmail account where you can download it and then import it into ePad. If you're using Outlook, you would go to, and I'm talking about the desktop client, you would go to File and then you would export. You would also have the opportunity to select specific folders, and then you would export that as it's called a PST file. That's the format that it would export in. This is another very common email file format. And but since ePad doesn't currently accept PSD files, you would have to take one further step to convert it to Mbox. So converting email files, say you have some PSD files or maybe even another format that that is maybe a little bit less common, like Apple Mail, maybe some older Eudora files. You can convert those to Mbox and then import them into ePad. There are quite a few tools out there that you could use. I'll just call out two that are very versatile and the ones that we tend to use the most. They're called Emailchemy and Aid for Mail. They do both require a paid license, which is about $50, but they convert to and from a very wide selection of file formats, and you can check the specifications for those software online before you purchase it to make sure that it can handle the file formats that you need to convert. And then I have the link to the ePad user guide there at the bottom of this slide. So I would definitely recommend checking that out as you're working your way through this process too, because it has a lot more detailed instructions than what I was able to give in this short time. And with that, I will just say thank you very much for being here today. I just wanted to leave you with some links for more information about the project and ways to stay in touch with us. So you have our Twitter there. You have our listserv if you would like to join to receive updates about the project. And then at the bottom of the screen, you have our project email account. So if you do have any follow-up questions that occur to you later on, please feel free to contact us there. I am the one who answers that email account, so you can get in touch with me there as well. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it back over to Ron.
Thank you, Sally. I know a lot of our attendees in the pre-conference survey shared that they feel very new to technology and digital content in what they're doing. Folks are associated with smaller local museums, etc., researchers who probably don't have a lot of staff. Sally, can you share a little bit about how possibly non-intimidating using something like ePad would be for a local archivist who is trying to grapple with particular email collections that they may have received?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, there's complexity to working with email, certainly, but at the same time, it's absolutely not impossible. And I think there are more and more resources out there online that have guidance about how to work with email. And I think if you are working with anything that's somewhat recent, like in the last 10 years or so, that is also going to be a lot less complicated than if you're working with something like older, like Eudora files from the early 2000s or 90s. So it's certainly not impossible. And, fortunately, I have to say with EPAD, it really gives you a very user-friendly way to navigate a collection and just learn a lot about it that you couldn't possibly just by looking at something in an email client. I know it's really hard to kind of get past the most recent email messages in your email client just because you sort of get lost in scrolling all the way down through those messages. So that's really what EPAD was designed to give you. Just so many different windows into an email collection. So,
and I do have a question. Wouldn't it be useful to archive all the Jeb Bush emails? Did I just hear that you deleted the ones he didn't want made public? Maybe you can talk a little bit more about the whole Jeb Bush episode.
Oh, the Jeb Bush debacle. Yeah, I'm not sure if somebody out there probably does have all those messages that we chose not to save. We felt like it wasn't our place to save those entire collections, so we just kept a small portion for test purposes and demonstration purposes. But I'm sure somebody out there has the full set with all of the dirty details.
Okay, well, so that was really, really informative. I've always been amazed at from the first time I used EPAD myself and played with it, what it kind of rationalizes the ability to approach something that's very complex, which is when you think about a collection of emails, just all the different issues you have to grapple with. And EPAD, I think, does an elegant job of trying to really provide a workflow, a way of keeping track and rationalizing the whole archival process for emails. So thank you very much. And as I said, the slides and the recordings will be available probably on the conference site, but after the conference is over. So thank you again, Sally. Our next speaker is Quinn Dombrowski. Quinn is the academic technology specialist in the Division of Literatures, Cultures, and Languages, and in the library at Stanford University. Quinn has a BA, MA in Slavic Linguistics from the University of Chicago and an MLIS from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Since coming to Stanford, Quinn has supported numerous non-English DH projects. DH stands for Digital Humanities, for those who are not familiar with all the acronyms and initialisms being thrown around, and work towards building better tools for non-English text analysis. Quinn will be talking about how you can use Voyant, a free web-based tool for text analysis that supports multiple languages to understand and share your materials in new ways. So go ahead, Quinn.
Thanks, Ron. All right, I will share my slides here. Today I'll be talking primarily about Voyant, which is this interface for doing text analysis, which I realize sounds potentially like technical and scary, but it really is a tool designed for people who don't necessarily have a background in coding or a background in doing this kind of work, to be able to surface interesting things about a set of texts, and sort of let you look at your materials in a new way. So starting off here, what is computational text analysis? I mean, that may sound like the sort of thing that is not really in your purview as people engaged with local history, but really it sort of gives you the ability to process text and explore it in a way that sort of goes beyond like reading things with your eyeballs. Imagine, looking at the entirety of, a person's papers or a person's emails or a web archive of like an entire website. I mean, you could read through all of those with your eyeballs and take notes about different trends and, different words that are used and different frequencies and things like that. Or you could use, computational tools to, make that a little bit easier. One of the things that I often stress with this, though, is that while it gives you a way to kind of look at the data in a different way, it doesn't give you any answers. At the end of the day, the computer can sort of tell you things. It can give you word counts, it can give you visualizations, it can give you information about things like different sentence lengths or different frequencies of terms over time. But what it can't do is actually tell you what any of that means or how meaningful that is for your data or for your understanding of the materials that you have. Like ultimately, that still comes down to human brains. As one really common example of a text analysis method, word clouds. You take a bunch of text, take all of Jeb Bush's emails or anything else, and stick it in this tool and see what are the words that are being used the most frequently. There are other ways that are a little bit more complicated than just doing word counts, and this gets a little bit more difficult potentially depending on the languages that you're working in. I work for the Division of Literatures, Cultures, and Languages, which is all of them except for English, East Asian, and Classics, although inevitably I end up doing some English along the way. Some of the tools that are built into Voyant and that are available more broadly are really mostly designed with English in mind. So if you're working with a language that works a lot differently than English, if you look at a language like Russian, for instance, where a single word might take 16 different forms depending on where in the sentence it's used, some of these methods may not work as well. But there is at least some basic support in Voyant for languages, including Romance languages with stop word lists. We'll get to that a little bit more in a minute. So some of the examples of text analysis that are kind of commonly cited in digital humanities, things like being able to look at topic modeling, sort of looking at what words cluster together across Vogue, looking at an analysis of like magazine covers over time and looking at like averages of those images, where are people generally positioned in these covers and like sort of how consistent are they in those stylistics. Looking at things when you have a data set that has like fairly rich metadata, you can look at different types of things over time. So looking at like fugitive slave ads versus wanted and for hire ads, and sort of how the frequency of those in newspapers, what that indicates about what's going on in the world at the time. So today we'll be looking at Voyant, which it processes a large amount of text. I mean, it doesn't have to be large. You can put in a single paragraph. You can give it a link to a web page. You can give it an entire corpus of hundreds of novels, and then you can sort of go through these different options that we'll cover for looking at different kinds of visualizations that it can create about your data. But first, we should talk about text. In order to use this, you need machine readable text. And so there's a difference between scanning something, and creating a PDF with, essentially an image of the text that you as a human can read. But the computer, unfortunately, like can't read that, not by itself, not without some more processing. You need to do something called optical character recognition, or OCR, to turn an image of a text into text that the computer can actually read and sort of extract the words from. And there's different software, different price points to be able to do this, in a fairly, accurate way at this point across multiple different languages and alphabets. But if you need a quick and dirty, and honestly, like fairly effective way to do this, one recent hack that's really quite nice is if you upload a PDF to Google Drive and then click on it and say open in Google Docs, it will work. It actually does a pretty decent job of doing OCR on your PDF and extracting the text from it, so that you can then save it as a plain text file, which is one of the options in Google Docs. You can do file save as .txt. And that's what you need as an input for that. So yeah, it bogs down a little bit if you have like really giant PDFs. If you have things that are like hundreds and hundreds of pages, I would suggest breaking it down into smaller chunks of PDFs, uploading them, and then getting your text files out of it that way. But yeah, I mean, it's really quite nice and can handle even some things that are kind of messy, like newspapers and such. There's a lot of questions that people have often when they get started with this kind of work, about how accurate the OCR needs to be, because the OCR will mess up. It will confuse letters for other letters. It will sort of misalign things sometimes, especially if you're dealing with stuff with columns. Things can get a little bit weird. And as researchers who are used to dealing with kind of like very precise replicas of things, if they're moved into a digital space, it can be kind of unnerving to see something that has that many text errors in it, as it's likely to have if you don't kind of manually proofread and correct the OCR. Kind of as a rule here, I would say that the more text you have, the less important the accuracy is, like up to a point. I mean, if it's complete gibberish, then that's not going to do you any good. But like, having 1 or 2% of the characters be off can actually be okay, even though like it's pretty cringe to look at with your human eyeballs. And there's a difference if you have like one paragraph and you're very invested in like looking at that paragraph with these tools. It's a different story than if you're looking at 100 novels or 100 large files of things. So your mileage may vary, but don't feel like you have to necessarily invest all the time in making sure that your source is like perfectly accurate. Chances are if the trends that you're looking at are really meaningful, plus or minus a few examples because of messy OCR is not going to be a huge problem. All right, so this is the URL for Voyant. We'll be sharing the slides from this, so don't feel like you have to jot everything down here. This is the documentation too, which is really detailed and thorough and kind of written with humanities folks in mind. It doesn't they're not assuming that people are coders who are using this tool. So loading text into Voyant. One of the nice things about Voyant is its user interface is also multilingual, and you can change it down here with this language icon. So there's a number of options that you can use for getting your text into here. You can put in a URL, you can put in multiple URLs, you can upload text files, or you can just type things or paste things into that box and it will work with it. And it will do its best at guessing what language that it's in and kind of doing appropriate things depending on the language. There's a few things that are built in. I believe with both Japanese and Tibetan, it can automatically segment the text. And this is a really great thing, because one of the challenges for a number of languages that don't use spaces the way English uses spaces is you basically have to like artificially separate the words by spaces for any of these tools that involve like word counts to be able to work. And it does some of that pre-processing for you. All right, so once you submit your text, this is the sort of panel that you'll get. I mean, it's a very whimsical and honestly, like it's sort of designed to like make this stuff fun, set of tools. So in the upper left, with labeled as 1, you'll see the word cloud, and this is your standard word cloud. You may notice if you've played with some of these things before that this one is smart insofar as it removes what are called stop words, which are just like super high frequency words that will take over any visualization like this if they're not removed. So things like the, and, a, it would be mostly these and ands and a's if you didn't remove those. So it removes those. You can customize it though. If there are certain words that you want to make sure that it keeps in and doesn't remove, you can make your own list of things that you want. So for instance, if you want to see like, in a word cloud, like the names of like all the people who are mentioned in, your archival papers, and you have a list of who those people are, you could actually set it so that there's like, those are the only words that appear in the word cloud, and you can sort of see their frequencies based on that. The middle panel here is the reader panel, where like, this is your text, this is what it loaded in, and you can just read through it with your eyeballs. Which is useful for trying to understand what's going on with some of these frequencies. You can sort of scroll through it. So if you see, like as in number 3, that there are certain trends that suggest like some terms are very frequent at the beginning and towards the end, you can actually read it with your eyeballs and sort of like see how that's occurring. The summary panel, which is number 4, sort of gives you like a high level view of things like most frequent words, words per sentence, vocabulary density, comparing things like total words versus unique word forms. So, how many different forms or occurrences of a given word are there is kind of useful. And then 5 is the context. So it will sort of pick one of the most common words and then show you to the left and the right, like sort of how that word occurs in context. So there are things you can do with each of these to sort of filter your results. I was referencing this earlier, that you can edit the stop words list to filter out words that you want to get rid of. Like maybe you want to get rid of people's names. Like what if this is an archive, like, if we were looking at Jeb Bush's email archive, maybe we want to get rid of the word Jeb because Jeb would just be really big and drown out the other things that we care about. So we could add that to the stop word list. And there's also something called stemming and other wildcard queries. So if you wanted to see, dance, dances, danced, dancing, you can search for DANC and then the star, and it will basically it will include all the things that could come after C for words that begin with DANC. Which can be really handy. So this is what the stop word list looks like. If you click on this little toggly thing, when you're looking at any one of those panels, that will get you into the settings for that particular panel. It tries to auto detect the stop word list for your language. Sometimes it gets it wrong. So you may want to edit that. Here's sort of a difference with the stop words. You can see that things like modifying this will change sort of what becomes the most prominent words in your visualization. Here's an example of filtering for specific words in the term occurrences list. So you can see here the difference between dance and dancing over the different segments of this long document. And then here's what happens if you try to do DANC with a wildcard. You can search for it just with the wildcard and it will kind of put all of these different options together when showing you your results, or you can sort of get a sense just through the pop-up how frequent any one of these different options is. And then here's your options for wildcard queries. You can also look for things like variations or combine things. If a person sometimes is referred to by their first name or their last name, you can search for them together to be able to kind of get those two things together. And then you can look also at the results of different kinds of wildcard queries to see are they, like, is their frequency occurring or diverging in different ways, just to sort of see if one is a good proxy for another one. So there are other tools that you can get into that are not part of this initial panel. There's really like an amazing depth of different options, and it's one of the things that I enjoy about Voyant is like it's honestly like fun to play with. Like put a thing in and then just go see what you can do with it based on the different tools. So if you click on this sort of Windowsy icon thing, you can choose different kinds of tools for any one of the panels. Links is an interesting one. This one shows the collocation between words, like how frequently do words sort of occur together in the same context. There's the terms berry, which are high frequency terms, and then ones that occur close to them. It's kind of like a word cloud, but it takes into context like which words are occurring together, not just which ones have like the highest frequency overall. There's a steam graph, which is interesting if you have a very long document or if you have a set of documents in order. So if you were to have, again, like all of Jeb Bush's emails, like over the course of multiple years, and you uploaded them in a way, where they occur in order. Usually this means you want to put the date in the file name or do something with the file names so that they sort alphabetically in the correct chronological order. But then you could look at, sort of as different like scandals emerge or as different topics emerged in like political discourse, how different frequencies increased or decreased at different points in time. There's a textual arc, which is animated here, and it sort of shows the terms in an arc that follows them in the order of the document. So how these terms occur in order within the document. And I mean, with some of these, there's not necessarily obviously like a research question that this answers. There's not necessarily a question you would come up with where like this is the tool that would go about answering the question. But again, it might be like a lens onto your text that gives you some ideas of things that you might, go about using other tools to actually answer. There's also a word tree that shows how words are used in different phrases within the corpus. So these are words that tend to come like right before dance and what comes right afterwards, and sort of how, the frequency of those. And then there's a dreamscape that is kind of interesting that tries to extract all the place names and gives you a map based on that. There's some caveats here that, if you have a bibliography or something like that in your text, chances are you're gonna be getting a lot of publisher locations. So you may need to edit your source text before you try this to get anything meaningful, or at least go double check on like where these places are. Finally, there's this corpus collocates, or like a grid tool that shows how often two words tend to come close together, and you can search for a word and then go see all of the words that tend to be that tend to co-occur with it in the same context. And here's some thoughts on how you actually like pick a tool. There's just a playing approach, which I think is totally fine, especially as you're doing this for the first time or approaching a new data set. Just sort of go see what's there and what makes you think, and what sort of gives you what makes you wonder things. And then you can follow up with more deliberately picking a tool to go answer that question. I'm thinking about whether context matters, what type of tool you have. Do you want a visualization? Do you want numbers out of this? And then you can read some documentation about the different tools and think about like how that might be applied to the research question you have. It's possible to export all of these things out of Voyant, which is great. You can get images out of it. You can get links to it if you have a web page and you want to sort of embed a visualization from Voyant in your website. You can do that too, or you can do sort of the static image. And depending on what the visualization is and how big your monitor is, it may be easier to just like take a screenshot of it on a large monitor to get like a higher resolution version, but you can export a static image. So finally, I thought I'd throw out a couple other tools that are out there for kind of doing collections digitally and sharing materials online. If you haven't come across Omeka, it's another free open source software platform for creating digital exhibits. If you have materials that you want to sort of share in a virtual exhibit, you can upload images, you can upload videos and other multimedia, put metadata in it, and then sort of construct together a narrative of all the materials together that you want to sort of display to tell a story. There's something called Palladio, which if you have a spreadsheet of data of some sort, maybe you have like dates, maybe you have thinking back to the email again, like a like to and from data plus a date, from a sender and a recipient. Palladio lets you go in a fairly easy and friendly way from a spreadsheet of this information into a network visualization or a map visualization of it. And finally, there's also something called story maps that also works from spreadsheets, where you can tell a story across space. If there are things that happened at certain times in certain places, and you want to sort of show a path of travel or show a path of like political events that sort of led to a chain of actions and reactions, you can again sort of put together a spreadsheet like of this timeline and generate it in a visual way using story maps, which are kind of neat. So yeah, give it a try. Let me know if you have any questions. Big thanks to Pam Locke for the Voyant slides. Did a great job explaining that through those. And yeah, I am happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Quinn. No questions yet, but please feel free to submit any questions you may have. Also, at the end, we will have a general Q&A time if people have other kinds of questions for all the panelists. I actually the reason why I thought it was good for you to be part of this panel, Quinn, was because to give all of this digital tools, I think for a lot of our participants is something that's kind of mind-blowing, and as I said, kind of intimidating. But I wanted to give folks a taste of what the researcher is trying to do with the digital content to kind of expand what other kind of reframe or rethink what their collections, if digitized or if made digitally available, can really expand the usage of their collections. And can you think of any particular experiences working with local museums or others? I mean, I'm thinking of like local museums who have maybe very historic runs of old newsletters that are not available anywhere else. And in some ways, it's still kind of inaccessible. So if they were digitized and then they could use these kinds of tools to actually help people discover and find the answers to their questions to them. But do you have any other examples that you can share that can help inform our attendees?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a lot of potential for small museums and archives, to digitize their things and connect with researchers, who want to work with them. There was a project I helped work on with Professor Brian Wagner at UC Berkeley, looking at some materials from a revolt of enslaved peoples in Louisiana. And these were the materials, like the court records and stuff, like hadn't been digitized, and they were just sitting there in the archive, but it's sort of in this collaborative partnership, they were able to work together, digitize these things, and also kind of restructure them as data. So now there are giant spreadsheets with all of this information about the accused, the timelines, and things like that. A lot of investment of effort went in on his part and on their part to get this stuff ready. But now people can pursue research questions that they couldn't have done before. Being able to just like at a glance like look at what were the genders of the different people accused of different kinds of things, what was the timeline, how quickly did this precipitate, and to Natalie's question in the Q&A about story map, that's a narrative that could, I think, productively be shared using story maps, which is another free open source library, where you could look at over the period of like a couple months when all of these events went down and then led to these like court cases. You could sort of trace through the different places that were represented in these different events, the places where people met to conspire, the places that like the revolt actually happened, and then the places where people were tried, to sort of walk someone through that story. And that's sort of one of many things that you can do once you go from old court records in archival boxes to a data spreadsheet that scholars can look at with a variety of different questions and goals.
Great. And I'm going to remind people that after Peter's talk and after he gets a chance to be asked specific questions about his talk, we will open up for more general questions to all the panelists. But thank you, Quinn. I always learn something new whenever I listen to you talk about all the cool things you're doing. And so, yeah, thank you again.
Thanks, Ron.
So our final speaker is Peter Chan. Peter has been the web archivist at Stanford Library since April 2020. Prior to being appointed web archivist, Peter worked as the digital archivist for the library, a position he began in 2010. Peter will be sharing his insights, approaches, and lessons learned archiving websites for the Stanford Libraries. The web is all over the place, so I'm sure you have a lot of very good lessons and stories to tell, Peter. So take it away, Peter.
Hi, thank you, Ron. So today I'm going to talk about web archiving basics. So let's go ahead. So first, we need to know what is web archiving. So I pick out a definition provided by IPC, which is the organization that have many national libraries as their participants. And actually, Stanford Library is one of the members. And they put out this, the process of collecting portions of World Wide Web, preserving the collection in an archival format, and then serving the archive for access and use. So then we need to know, what's the difference between an archived website and a live website, because some people expect after the archived website, the archived website would be exactly the same as the original one, but unfortunately it's not. Archive website, so after we archive the website, there are things that won't work. So for example, you can do some search in some site, but in the archive site, you cannot do that. And sometimes actually, because of the tools or the technology limitations, some of the format may not look exactly the same as the live website. So this is something that people need to know when they archive website. So I'll go through selection, harvest, preservation, and access. So you need to select what website to archive, because there are so many sites in World Wide Web. And then after you select what site to archive, then you have to harvest it. You need a tool to copy the site, and then you need to preserve the file. And at last, you need to provide access to the site. Let's go through them one by one. First is selection. First is the collection policy. You need to formulate a policy of what you want to collect. Some institution or some, say at Stanford, we have different departments. Some departments concentrate on archiving the Stanford history, which is our university archives. And then we have a department who concentrate on archiving the technology history. So we may archive games. We may archive the Silicon Valley startup companies. So you need to formulate a collection policy of what you want to collect. And then after you have this formulation, then there's still a lot out in the World Wide Web. Even you have some collection policy. Then the next one you need to look at is there are some what we call at-risk material. There are websites that will cease to exist. Some of the reason may be, some people stop paying their web hosting service. If they stop paying their web hosting service, then, that site may not exist anymore. If you, type in the URL, you won't find the site, the live site. And there are also, some people, the web domain registration, they don't want to pay for their domain registration. Then the same thing happens. The URL won't appear when you go to the Google or whatever browser, put in the URL, it won't exist. So those is what we call at-risk material. There are times that people will tell the public, say, okay, we are closing down our website, or we then if this is fall under your collection policy, then you may want to archive the site. So this is one scenario, the at-risk material. The other scenario is there are major changes to website. Say, for example, our library website is upgrading from 777 to 888. And we expect a lot of changes to our existing website. Then it may be a time, for if you want to record, preserve the old design and everything about the old sites, then you need to archive the site before the new site launch. So because many times people will take advantage of when they migrate or upgrade their platform from one platform to the other, they do a major change to their website. So there may be times, there's times that you may want to archive the site. There are content changes to websites because websites are not static, especially news websites. There are news that people put out something, they may update the site, and then the old information may be removed. So if you are in that situation and then the site is fall under your collection policy, you may want to archive the site as well. But anyway, after you decide which site you want to archive, you should take a look at Internet Archive, what Internet Archive have already archived, because they already archived 682 billion web pages. So you can go to say this is the Internet Archive, and then they have what we call a Wayback Machine. So let me try, say I want to archive stanford.edu, and then you see actually stanford.edu have been saved 76,000 times between December 29 to 1996 to May 11, 2022. So whatever website you want to archive, you should take a look at this Wayback Machine. If it's already archived, then you may want to take a look at whether they archive it properly, or there are things that they are missing, and then you want to archive a more complete version of the site. So, okay. And then the other thing you need to consider is copyright, because I would say most of the material put out in Google or Internet World Wide Web is copyrighted material. And then, of course, if they are put out by federal government, those are in open domain, so they don't have copyright. But I would say many of the information or many of the material in World Wide Web, they are copyrighted material. Then, but even copyrighted material, you may archive it because fall under fair use consideration. You may archive it for research purpose or some other purpose. So take a look at this. This is a code of best practices in fair use, and then this note is created by Harvard Law Review, and they have a very elaborate fair use scenario that definitely people should look at that before they do any web archiving. And of course, you can also get permission from the copyright holder. If you want to archive a person's website, you can email them, ask them for permission. So we have scenario in our case at Stanford that we want to collect some people's papers, and then their website is one of their papers. We just ask them permission to archive the site. Then of course you have permission, there's no problem. And when you go to archive the site, then there are software code in the site. Some of the software, some of the website actually will have a code, what they call a robots.txt. Actually ask you not to crawl their site. At Stanford, we definitely will honor, we will, if they say do not crawl, then we won't crawl the site because they already say do not crawl the site. But of course, there are tools that you can just ignore the robot.txt, but this is not we use. This is not our policy. We will respect robots.txt. And then is one way is you also honor if you archive the site and then you don't have the permission from copyright holder, and then the copyright holder come to you and say, okay, please take down whatever you archive because you don't have permission from me to archive the site. At Stanford, we will honor the request, so we will take down the site. And the next one is, if you have, you have a list. Finally, you come up with a list of websites you want to archive, and then you have to decide how often you want to archive the site. Do you want to archive the site monthly or half yearly or yearly? This is something you need to decide. And of course, if there's a system for you to manage that, that will be great. Because otherwise, you may put it in a spreadsheet and then manually go to the site and then archive the site at the time that you want. So this is something that we need to pay attention regarding selection. So next one is harvest. So harvest is how can you copy the site? So because it's electronic files, it's in World Wide Web. We have different tools to do that, or tools and services. So I will go through that one by one. Archivit actually is a paid service. They have two levels of paid service, Archivit Pro and Archivit Basic. At Stanford, we are using Archivit Pro. So we'll go through, take a look at Archivit Basic. So at Archivit, actually, they provide the tools for you for collection management. You put in the site what you want to collect and then at what frequency. And then Archivit will go to archive the site for you and store it and then provide access to people who want to look at the site. This is their current web page, and then they mentioned a $500 yearly for 122 gigabyte storage, and then $800 for 256 gigabyte archive. But for this basic Archivit Basic, if you have problem, you can ask a forum, and then you have to, some people may answer your question, but you may not have answer for what you, your questions. And then they have the Archivit Pro, which is the same for, they have the collection management. You put in what website you want to collect, and then at what interval they will go out to collect it for you, and then they will store the archive website for you and then provide access. But this one, they have support. If you encounter issues when you archive the site, then you can email them, and then they will have engineer to look at your problem. This is much more expensive than the Archive Basic, but I believe there are many people, many institutions, at least in the States, actually use Archive Pro for their web archiving service. So the next one is, we'll go through that matrix later. I'll just go through all this one by one first. The other way you can archive a web page is a tools called Save Page Now. So this is offered by Internet Archive and is free of charge. You don't have to pay to archive anything for that. So say if IPC, I mentioned, I take out the IPC, take the definition of web archiving from IPC. There's a page about their conference coming, and then if you want to archive that page, you just copy the link and then go to the Save Archive, Save Page Now, and then you just put in the link. and you can save it, save our link, save you, there's options, and then save in my archive, and then you can say, click email me the result. After you click save, they will go to save that particular page, because a website may contain different tabs. So what they are going to save is only the page you are looking. And as you can see, they are progressing. And after they save the page, actually, they will give you a URL. And then that is the URL for here. A snapshot was captured in a view page. If I click on that page, you will take me to the Wayback Machine that is provided by Internet Archive. So as you can see here, this is not the live site. This is the Wayback Machine provided by Internet Archive. And then this is the image of the archive site. So as you can see, it's very simple to archive one page, and then it's also free. Web Recorder is another tool that the thing it is good for is archiving social media accounts, say Facebook, Instagram, all those web page is very difficult to save. And actually, Internet Archive, the archivist service, don't do it well. So we tried that, and then we don't have a good result. However, Web Recorder do it very well. So this is a tool that is free to use. You can just add it as a Chrome extension. Actually, I add this to here and say, okay, if we go to Facebook, this is the Stanford Facebook page. If we want to archive that Stanford Facebook account, we can just click that extension, and then we say start. And you will start, actually, you say is recording. And then it's loading the page, and then it's beginning to archiving this Facebook account. Since we specify autopilot, then actually it's scrolling the Facebook account for us. So you scroll and scroll. Since Stanford page have a lot of information, you go for a long time, but you can stop anytime you want. Say, if I say stop, and then I can go to browse what I have already saved. So I did once, this morning, this is the archived Facebook account I just archived just a few minutes ago. So I think because it's just saved not long ago, so it's still, they are still saving, in their server. So as you can see, you can see whatever you save here in a browser environment. So Web Recorder is free, and then it saves social media account. The other free tools, let's go to that. Web Creator tool, and this is a much more complicated tools, and this is being used by National Library of New Zealand and also the Netherlands. And I understand there are some institutions in UK also use this tool to archive their sites, but this is a complicated tool, and you definitely need some IT resources in order to do that. Heritrix actually is the software underlying what archivists use to harvest the site. The same is a very complicated tool. You definitely need IT resources in order to use it. HTT track is I would say, quite commonly used tool software to archive websites. We have sites also archive using the HTT track. So I will go back and see, look at this matrix to, evaluate what about the tools that I mentioned. So archiving, is paid service, and then it's simple to use, but it cannot work well with social media. The file format and preservation format, I will talk about that when we talk about preservation. Save page now, is free to use. It's very simple, but you also cannot do social media. Web recorder is free, and then it's simple, and then you can archive social media. Web creator tool is free, it's open source, and then but it's compact, and then you cannot do social media. Heritrix, the same, is free, and then it's compact and cannot do social media. HTTP track is free to use, is quite simple. You cannot do social media. And then the catch actually is the preservation consideration. So let's go to the next aspect. So preservation, because after you archive the site, you need to pay attention to how to preserve your files. Digital material is different from traditional paper material. Paper material, both, if you put in, a suitable environment, and then, the books will preserve, you can preserve it easily for 100 years. But digital material, if you don't pay attention to that, you may not be able to read a file. There are many materials, say just archived 10 years ago. We may not be able to look at that because of different issues. So first issue is file format. So file format is something that we need to pay. If you say if you are using Word, if you go to save the Word document, then it may ask you what format you want to save, whether it's Word document format, plain text format, PDF format. So there are formats, say if, of course, Microsoft Word is very popular now, but for some people who don't have Microsoft Word, then they may not be able to read the document. If you save the file in plain text format, then there are much more software that you can use to read the files. So that is something that the format issue is something that you need to pay attention. And luckily, the Library of Congress actually, they list out some recommended file format for different scenarios. And for web archiving, actually, they list out a format called WARC format. And if we go back to my matrix on file format, actually archive it, all the archive save page now, web created tool, Heritrix, they all save in WARC file format, which is a recommended file format for digital preservation. But HTT track is not. So actually, we have a hard drive. Actually, people, our staff, archive some website using the HTT track format, and then we cannot just play back the archive site using our playback software. So we have to do some conversion before we can pay back that files. And then the WACC is actually a kind of a WACC format, but anyway, it's not a recommended file format as in Library of Congress list. And second thing is storage. Storage, after you save the file, you specify, you know the file format, you are saving the archive website in WACC format, but where are you going to store the file? You can store it in an external storage or internal storage. Internal storage is integrated in the computer, and then you can have web service. You can save the file in Google Drive, or if you are using Archive.it, they will save the file for you. So this is something that you need to pay attention. And if you are saving it, in your own environment, then you need to pay attention to how many copies you want to save. So if you are only safe in one copy, then it's very risky, because you may have something wrong with your hard drive, or if there's a fire in your the computer room, then you may lose that copy. So actually, there's a NDSA is a organization that backed by Library of Congress. They have recommendation for how many copies you should have. So they mentioned here you should at least have 2 copies in separate locations. There are different levels of security. So if you are interested, you can look at that. And web service, of course, there are also risk level associated with some. If you are using a web service, if you save things in Google Drive, then you need to pay attention to authentication, because you need a login to gain access to the stored file. And then the same for a company, which offer this service, they may cease to operate. So there are different risk level to consider. The final thing is the access. After you save the file, then you need to pay attention to what software you use to pay back your archived website. At Stanford, actually, we are using Open Wayback software, which is also used by Archive.it. Well, Archive.it upgrade their Wayback Machine, not using Open Wayback last year, but before that, for a long time they use Open Wayback. And then this is a Python Wayback, which is a software that is written in Python, and then Archive.it actually upgrade the Wayback Machine and then use that PYWB as their payback software. And at Stanford, we are also considering upgrade our old payback machine with PYWB. There's another software called Solar Payback. And this software actually is used by the National Library of New Zealand, and then National Library of Denmark. And also there's some other national libraries using that software. And then Replay web page actually is the software that replace the whatever we use for web recorder. They have their own software to replace the archived website. There's also a web archive player, which is a desktop. You can install that software in your desktop and then open the archive file using that software, and then you can see the archived website. And the other consideration is, you need to decide whether you want to offer the access to in the web or in locally, in reading room only. So I understand that there are many national library only offer people to browse the archive website in their own reading room. It's not, you cannot just use public web browser and sitting on your own desk to see the archive websites. And also, at Stanford, we offer to embargo the website for 6 months before we release it to public. That is another thing that if there's a website, public website, then people may feel more comfortable. The copyright holder may feel more comfortable. People are not going to your archive environment to look at their site, but go to the live website to look at the website. And then, of course, you can also consider to provide access after the copyright expires. So this is basically what I want to talk about. And we can open to questions now.
Thank you, Peter. No questions so far, but please post them. I did, when you were sharing the different resources, I mean, the first thing, of course, for me was I was struck with how complicated doing more customized web archiving can be, but the tools that really appeal to me, and I've used myself, are the tools that the Internet Archive has, via the Wayback Machine. So it made me think that a local museum may have an exhibit on some topic, but would want to supplement their exhibit with local websites, because we all breathe the website day to day, but it's difficult to just say, well, go to this URL, then that URL. But if you can actually curate using something like Internet Archive, a stable web collection that can supplement an exhibit, it seemed like that would be an idea. Can you speak to that as a possible tool to use for creating a supplemental kind of collection of websites?
Well, first, I would say if you are if you have a exhibit and referring to a website, it's better you use a archived version of the site rather than the live site, because you don't know when the live site is going down. And then the live site, the content may change. So when you create your own content, and then you think, okay, this is a good content, and then you put in the site, put in the link, the live link. And when people look at that link, the content may be different. So, but if you are using an archived version of the site, then you will be sure that what you create will be the same as what other people look at your collection when they view the collection. So first, you need to find an archived version. So whether you should look at the Wayback Machine and see whether it's already archived, and then you can use the link. The link is permanent, so you can just copy the link, put in your archive, your environment, and then when people click that, they will go to the Wayback Machine and see the content that you intended for. So this is one thing. And then, of course, if they are not in Wayback Machine, if it's just a simple page, I would recommend you use Save It Now, the Save Page Now, because Save Page Now is, as I show people, is simple to use. You install the web extension, or you don't have to. You don't even have to install the web extension. You can go to the URL and then plug in the URL you want to archive. And people, they will generate a link for you, and then you can use that link as your exhibit link. So that's something that I would recommend.
Thanks, Peter. And taking a step back, because I know often people will use terms, including myself, that you assume everybody knows what they are. There is a question: what exactly is Internet Archive? Is it a private company? Who decides what sites they archive?
Okay, so Internet Archive is a non-profit organization. Actually, they are registered as a library, and is the first organization that go out to archive website. And if you go to if you search Internet Archive, they will tell you more about the organization. So this is the organization because they are first to go out to archive website, even before many public library or the National Library do that. So there are things that the National Library don't have, and then they have to rely on Internet Archive, the Wayback Machine in Internet Archive, to look at the archive website. So, and there's also many people use it because they are definitely have the largest collection of archive websites in the world.
Great. No, it's good to kind of know that history, but also just something that we don't even think about, like websites started being built probably in the 90s, and yet a lot of that content is lost because no one really archived it. But the Internet Archive, because it had that vision way back then, becomes sort of a source of a lot of that content that would no longer be available if they hadn't actually started archiving it, which begs the question why it's so important to try to archive now content, because the Internet Archive cannot archive every single website that is created in the US or the world. So it's up to others to try to also supplement what the Internet Archive does to make sure these collections are available 50 years from now.
Yeah.
So,
definitely.
So with that, thank you, Peter. That was, I think it provided another sort of insight to another aspect of digital archiving, which is web archiving. So in the last 15 minutes or so we have, I'd like to invite all the panelists to come back on, and I'm going to try an experiment. I hope I don't blow it. You can always post a question in Q&A, but if you raise your hand, then I will unmute you and you can actually ask your question of the panelists. And they can be more general questions, ask them anything, stump them, make them think about things they hadn't thought about, whatever. So we invite you to go ahead and ask you a question.
Should we stop the recording before we do that?
Yeah, let's go ahead and so we can have a more free-flowing kind of thing. So let me go ahead and stop the recording.